It is February 10th, 2000, and I'm with Sonny Thomas. And Sonny, you're going to start off, I'd like you to, if you will, just tell me, how you started getting into being a folk music activist.
Okay. Well, I guess my interest in folk music began in elementary school back in the late 50s, early 60s, around the time of the early days of the folk revival.
How old are you?
I'm 52. And I had an elementary school music teacher who was a folk music fan, and she played albums by Harry Belafonte and Burl Ives. And then, of course, around that same time, the Kingston Trio had a big hit with Tom Dooley, and I just happened to live in the county Tom Dooley lived in, so there was a real, personal connection there to that song. And there was just something about folk music that I loved, and I've been a fanatic fan for most of my life. I guess it is now, probably for 40 years. I've followed folk music about as closely as it's possible to do, and took up guitar at an early age, and in high school had a little Peter, Paul and Mary type band, and when I went off to college, that was a stepping stone to my career as a professional folk musician. Of course, it never happened, but then when I turned 30, I decided I really had to get involved in it in some fairly serious way, so I opened up a music shop specializing in folk albums and musical instruments, and did that for a couple of years. And in the course of doing that, I accumulated a mailing list. When I closed the shop then, another fellow and I used that list to start the Fiddle and Bow Folk Music Society. We felt like in order to bring professional level folk musicians to the Winston-Salem or Triad area, there needed to be an organization so that word could be gotten out to fans. And in no time at all then, we were hearing from musicians and booking agents, and went from doing a show or two a month to now we do a show about every week.
When you were playing and trying to make your own way as a musician, what type of stuff would you say you did? What kind of style did you have? And what instruments did you play?
Well, I played guitar, just good. That was real young.
Okay.
High school, just copy the folk acts of the day.
Okay.
Peter, Paul and Mary stuff.
Right.
I still play music some, mainly Irish music. Play bouzouki, sitar, that kind of thing. With local band, just kind of for fun.
Okay.
Occasional profit, but more for fun than anything else.
Now, you don't earn your living with the Folklore Society, or do you? I don't know. Okay.
No, I'm a social worker by trade. It's my day job. So.
Okay. And so the Fiddle and Bow?
Yes.
Okay. Fiddle and Bow has been going then for
almost 20 years. We
yeah.
started in 1981.
Okay.
And we've done hundreds and hundreds of shows. So it's 19 years it is. I did a radio show for about 16 years on a local public radio station, playing folk music, promoting what we did through the society.
And what type of acts would the society have? What would be a calendar? What would be a year?
Well, a little of everything. Lots of singer-songwriters. They seem to be the most aggressive in booking themselves, and so our schedule gets filled with probably more than I'd really like to book. But we'll do a couple of bluegrass shows a year, some Celtic music. It's just pretty much a little of all that falls under the umbrella of folk music as it exists today.
And what kind of performance space do you use?
Well, for 14 years we were in the back room of a restaurant, and there was a stage there, and the owner of the restaurant just turned that room over to us for our shows, and we didn't pay him anything. He made his money off of the food and beer he sold to the audience that we would bring in. Then after 14 years there, the restaurant had to close because of rerouting of a highway. And since then, we've been in like 4 different locations, and have struggled some because every time we've moved, we kind of feel like we've lost a few people. So we're in a little bit of a dip right now in our concert attendance and membership. But we kind of feel like we'll survive still.
Is the bulk of what you do these public performances with bringing in people?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and do you have a membership base, or is it just a mailing list?
Yeah, a person can be a member, and that entitles them to a discount on concert.
Okay.
Cover charge. They get the monthly newsletter, which we mail out. I guess we probably got 200 or 300 members, and it's been as high as probably 400 or 500.
Is Fiddle and Bow involved in the dance scene at all?
Well, there's sort of an offshoot contra dance group. They're pretty independent, but they've used our name over the years, and really the only connection was when they started. We said that we would back them if they ran into any financial problems, but they never did, and they do a very successful dance weekend, which they probably got a lot more money in the bank than we do these days. So, it's very independent of us, but even though I think it still uses our name as part of the thing.
And how about membership activities that are directed toward members? Do they do sings or weekends or get together?
We don't. Our raison d'etre over the years has mainly been a concert presenter.
Okay.
Unlike some other folk music societies where they mainly get together and jam. And I guess that's a reflection of my own interest, which is more in professional level folk music. For me, the real thrill comes from bringing a great artist into the same space with a great audience. That to me is more exciting than playing music myself or anything like that. So that's kind of what I live to do is to make that happen.
And have you done the booking all these years?
Yep.
Okay.
From the beginning.
Okay, so you necessarily had to work at least with agents.
Oh yeah. Right.
And the artists themselves.
Right.
Until the Folk Alliance came along, were you working kind of in isolation beside the necessary business contacts to get a guy or a woman, get an artist booked and brought there? Or were you hooked up with the great scheme, as
Not
I've heard
so
Gordon
much.
Weissman say it, is to get people to see each other and share ideas and what have you? Did you have an opportunity
Well, we
to do
were
much of that?
Not a lot. Actually, we made an attempt at it before the Folk Alliance, which is why Elaine, I think, was real interested in. It made the trip to Winston-Salem, even to talk about the Malibu meeting. But yeah, the Southeast is really different from most other parts of the country, and there's not a long-standing history of venues presenting professional level folk music. There have been very few over the years, and particularly in our area, there was no history of it. So when we started, it was great for musicians and booking agents because there was one more little stop, maybe on the way to Atlanta, or we're not that far from the D.C. area, areas where there has been more of a good solid live music scene. But yeah, in '86, I guess a few years before the Folk Alliance, we had just kind of through the grapevine, you hear of other people doing things, other coffee houses, other folk societies. So we attempted to organize the Southeast, and we hosted a weekend get-together, and people came from Charleston, West Virginia, from Charlottesville, Virginia. A lady came up from Georgia. Bob Zentz from Norfolk, Virginia came. Folks came from, where else? Columbia, South Carolina. Places where there was a little bit happening, and we thought, well, we'll all benefit from working together, but what we found was that we did things in such different ways that the potential for networking was not what we had hoped it would be. For instance, we do a weekly show and we book way ahead, whereas the people in Charleston, West Virginia do a big funded concert series of maybe one show a month, and to coordinate that just would have been very difficult, and we kind of left the weekend having had a great time and made some new friends, but with no plan to continue really.
Right.
And nobody whose job it was going to be to try to keep the thing together, and after a year or so it just kind of fell apart. But Elaine knew about it, so when she got the notion to try to do something nationally, then they traveled around. She and Clark came through Winston-Salem, and we met. She told me about the thing in Malibu, and the Fiddle and Bow Society was kind enough to pay my way there. And, had a great time. The stories you share with people doing what you're doing, the booking agents that you all hate, and the artists who are difficult to deal with. It was just great fun.
Yeah.
To talk about all those things.
Did you have any sense going out to Malibu that something could be done, or were you skeptical and just looking forward to I'll wait and see, but I'll
Kind
have
of wait
fun.
and see.
Yeah.
And I guess to some extent I'm sort of still in wait and see mode. It's really gotten to be way bigger than I ever would have imagined. I can't remember exactly how many people made it to Malibu. I'm guessing 150 to 200.
The number that's usually used is 130. That's what I hear all the time.
Something like
Yeah.
that. It was a great weekend, and you got to put, faces to all those voices you'd talked to over the phone, and names that you knew, the agents you'd just had telephone conversations with for, in my case, I guess 7 or 8 years, and that was great experience. And for the first few years, as I mentioned earlier, it was still fairly small, tighter knit group, and then after a few years, it just kind of ballooned. And now, I just see faces that I see year after year, but I'm forgetting names, and there's not that close knit.
Now, in Malibu, I gather Clark and Elaine did an introduction. Yeah. Why have we gathered you all here?
Yeah.
What was their pitch, as you recall it?
Well, it was
And,
just
obviously,
that,
I've heard this before, but everybody tells it to me a little differently, so I hope to pull together as much collective memory as I can. So what do you recall their pitch was there?
Well, just that that the folk music scene needed something like that. That there was probably untapped potential that had a better chance of being reached if we were all organized somehow. If we saw each other on a regular basis to talk about issues that affected, the music scene, whatever aspect of it might be, from recording to performing to the immigration problem, INS problems and things like that, things that the organization has addressed over the years.
Yeah.
And of course, everybody thought that sounded like a great idea, and I'm sure everybody left there, certainly I did after having had the earlier failed experience, that, well, this all sounds great, but will it really hold together? Is the impetus there that will keep this thing going? And then, I was, very flattered and honored to be elected to the steering committee that weekend.
How did that come about?
Well, I think anybody that wanted to do it could put their name in the hat, and those there voted, and probably to some extent it was a matter of how many people you knew.
Okay.
Of course, everybody knew Clark and Elaine, and people like Mark Moss, with Sing Out, of course, those were big names, and the people would know. I was pretty surprised, but flattered when I got on there, and I was kind of taken aback in a way too that here I was plugging away in my little part of the country, and suddenly I'm on what was kind of the pre-board of the organization. I would have been maybe I'm more surprised almost in retrospect, because at the time I thought, well, this may come to nothing, so I'm flattered, but big deal, But considering what it's become, I guess I see it maybe as more of an honor having been there.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, who on the steering committee, if any, did you know ahead of time?
Well, I knew Art Minius. He's from North Carolina, and I've met Art before. He was doing some concert reviews for a local weekly arts and entertainment magazine, so I met him at Villanova concerts. And then we drove together up to the 2 meetings in Philadelphia during 89. 2 steering committee meetings. We made that trip together. But he's the only one I knew, other than Clark and Elaine, who had come by Winston-Salem. Lots of, on the steering committee, really, the names I knew, but people I'd never met.
Sure.
Sandy and Caroline Tate, people like that. I haven't been a fan. I just knew their names. I read all the magazines. Thousands of recordings. It's more an obsession almost. It's a very serious hobby, I guess maybe would be.
Yeah. Oh, I understand that. You're probably more intense than I am, but I understand it. I read all the magazines.
Oh, yeah.
Have long before I decided to do anything like this.
Yeah.
But let me backtrack a little bit, because I don't want to forget this. Were you at all affected personally by the whole political aura of the 60s folk revival, the topical song movement, and Seeger's politics, and its whole connection with the political left, which hung around the whole scene Although as it moved away from the 60s, people wanted to talk about it less because people got diverse. But
I'm sure I was, because as a teenager in high school, you know, I still love folk music, but I mainly love traditional, and still my favorite kind of folk music is traditional folk music. And of course, there was not too much political content to that.
Right.
You know, there, of course, were artists like Joe Baez who did a lot of traditional songs during that era. You know, they were very political people.
they were political people doing
And then
traditional
during the
songs.
60s, of course, with Bob Dylan, became political. You know, the actual music itself,
Right.
you know, went from being the kind of traditional folk music that had made folk music commercially successful through the Kingston Trio and people like that, Peter, Paul, and Mary early, to being, you know, very much part of the political movement of that era. And during the course of, I guess, late high school and early college, I went from being kind of just a mindless teenager, not really thinking too much about Vietnam War, things like that. You know, I just figured, okay, I trust my government, you know, to being, you know, I ended up coming out of college and I, you know, did 2 years as a conscientious objector. So yeah, it definitely had an impact. I probably didn't realize at the time it was the music scene doing it. But then too, and it probably wasn't solely that. You know, it was just I was of that age, you know,
Right.
the late '60s college era when so much was happening on college campuses around the country, and you know, you couldn't help but be affected by that. And of course, for me, the music was very much a part of that whole thing too.
And you take a lot of revivalists from in the urban areas, and the Rounders are a good example of this because they all grew up in either, well, not Mary, but Ken grew up in New York and Bill grew up in the Boston area, and they were very stereotypical college-age, urban, educated folk revivalists.
Mhm.
And their attitude was that what Rounder was doing was a political act, whether it had political content or not, putting together all these disparate musics and the music of, you know, little musics, the music of the dispossessed, the music of the unheard,
Right.
was by in and of itself a political statement. Do you find do you buy into that at all personally, or think it holds together?
Well, it works for them.
Yeah, that's what happened.
You know, and I don't know that anybody else would know that's what they're up to.
Yes.
Certainly not the masses wouldn't.
Right, and do the artists give a crap, who are the traditional artists that they're
Probably
presenting?
not. You know, they'd probably even be on the other side politically. You know,
Right.
but yeah, that you know, that certainly was an interesting phenomenon of the whole '60s political thing.
Yeah.
But for me today, and even though they are so closely tied together, you know, the political folk music of the '60s, and as it's continued through, probably, I guess, folk music is the most political of music scenes or genres, maybe. To me, the music still is the most important thing, and I don't like to be preached to. I mean, I went through that '60s era, and I formed my political philosophy then, and and it's pretty much the same as it was then. So I don't really have the interest, or sometimes even the patience to get to listen to a lot of politically oriented folk music anymore.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. It's you know, preaching to the, you know, converted for me. I mean, I know I say right on, yeah, I agree with you, but music to me is for entertainment first of all, I think, and maybe that separates me certainly from the Rounder folks, and for them it's a form of politics, but to me, I love the music because of the beautiful melodies and traditional folk music and the great stories it tells. And if there's some politics thrown in there, that's okay, but it doesn't have to be to make it worthwhile for me. I still, to this day, prefer just straightforward traditional folk music, you know, the old ballads and stuff like that. That's really what rings my bell to this day, you know. And so I don't tend to, kind of ignore stuff that gets really political. You know,
Now, how was, let's go back, I wanted to make sure I hit that, but I'm curious about how, from your standpoint, the steering committee did come together and made itself a functioning unit. I guess you had your first meeting right after the election. election?
A few months, yeah, I think.
Well, did you meet in Malibu right after you were
Yeah,
constituted?
just
Did you
after.
get together right there?
To plan the next meeting.
Okay.
And, Robert Cohen and Diane agreed to host it in Philadelphia. I guess it was in April maybe, or something like that. So Art and I drove up, and it was just a completely strange environment for me, kind of like you mentioned Anne Blaine had said, that I took folk music pretty seriously, but in a different way, I think. I took it seriously because I love the music so much.
Uh-huh.
But I realized too that a lot of people on the steering committee came with a lot of different other agendas regarding folk music.
Can you elaborate on what some of those might be? Even if you don't want to put names to it, but just what were some of the agendas?
Well, I kind of got the impression that there were some people that wanted to feel like they were players in the folk scene, power brokers of the folk scene, which, back then was a pretty strange notion, and maybe still is, that considering the kind of nature of the genre, but and people took things very seriously, just the minute details of working out statements of purpose and things like that. A lot of argument and debate about how things would be worded and the political correctness of everything, which certainly has to be a concern, but it's not something that I would have thought people could be screaming at each other over, which actually happened. People, there were some very tense moments in those meetings, and I don't believe we had a facilitator at the first one. It's possible we did, but I know definitely at the second one, there was a person brought in to be a facilitator. I think partly because of just kind of the way things went, just to kind of keep things more focused and calm and all of that. But my memory is failing me. But there could even have been somebody at the first one, but I tend to think maybe there wasn't. But somebody could correct me on that. But so yeah, it was. I was sort of taken aback at how serious people could get about things that seemed fairly insignificant to me, like the wording of phrases, and there was even, big, I think actually the one that ended in a screaming match was about whether or not the volunteers in Philadelphia would have to pay to get into the conference. I think that's what it was about. And the local people feeling, hey, we're going to have to go out and round up a bunch of people to come help with this thing. We don't think they should have to pay. And other people feeling like, well, we're all working toward this, and in the early days when money is really crucial, we kind of feel like everybody should pay something anyway. And I think that's what one of the big arguments was about.
Can you remember any of the substantive discussions?
Well,
was there any substantive discussion about mission statement, purposes of the organization?
Oh yeah,
what
yeah.
type of
well,
issues?
I mean, the arguing would kind of happen. You'd go for those substantive things,
right,
and kind of deal with the bulk of it, and then the arguments would start around the kind of peripheral things.
Sure.
The wordings and that kind of stuff, and fine tuning it to everybody's satisfaction and all. So, but yeah, it was. Trying to, and there was a real concern to try to make it as all-inclusive as possible in a lot of different ways. Like all kinds of people. They wanted to be sure that it didn't become just an organization for performers. They wanted to be sure that everybody involved in the scene, however it might be, felt like this organization was for them.
Okay.
And then too, all of ethnic inclusiveness, that kind of thing. To whether, well, should this be American, North American? No, if North American, then we have to include Mexican as well as Canadian, and all that. How to do all that, and how to, since the preliminary meeting was just kind of to see if anybody wanted to do this, then the next step was to create widespread interest in it so it would work. So it had to, when the point came to start getting back out to people, said, okay, we had this meeting, this is what happened, and this is what we want to do. I think there was a lot of care to develop it so that anybody that was contacted would feel like that there was some reason they should be part of it.
Now, was there a debate about the scope of the organization, or was there a kind of consensus we wanted to get everybody from performers to agents to talent buyers to...
Well, there again, I think there was pretty good consensus on most of it. But then, when you get out to the fringes of things, that's where there would tend to be argument. I mean, certainly, it was clear enough that you had to include certain types of people or whatever. Then the more peripheral types, that's where maybe one person would disagree with another about, well, do we really want to have, But I can't give you specifics.
Sure.
It's been too long.
Yeah, I understand.
To remember.
What about the, I guess one of the most interesting decisions, which I gather was made early on, maybe even in Malibu, and I'm not sure about that though actually, was the decision not to define folk. What discussion was there around that, and when did it?
Well, certainly in Malibu that came up. That's been the big question of the folk scene for years and years.
Sure.
People still want to argue about it, and others could care. And
I don't so much want to know how you would define folk per se,
Yeah,
but I want
right.
to know about the decision whether or not to define it, since you got an organization that's got it in its name.
Yeah, well, I guess, and here again, I can't remember specifically, but probably the decision was not to try to.
Okay.
Because if you do, then you're going to alienate some people.
Okay.
If you, a definition, it would be so broad as to be meaningless, or it would be so narrow as to leave out people that shouldn't be left out. So I guess maybe there was just sort of a feeling that, well, we'll just have to trust people to know what it means.
Was there any dissent on that point at all? Was there anyone who was, we need a definition type?
I can't recall it that there
Okay.
was. It's possible there could have been.
But the consensus was clearly no definition.
Yeah, I think so. Just in order to keep it as all-inclusive as possible.
And the other thing that's, there was some debate about individual members versus organizations only. Do you recall that?
Yeah, how to structure that. Yeah, gosh, that's right. I forget now how that went. But yeah, I think I do now recall there being a good bit of discussion about membership categories and that kind of thing, but I can't remember
Okay.
a lot of details about how that discussion went on or anything.
Were you startled by, say, I guess the starkest juxtaposition I can think on the steering committee in terms of organizations would be something like Fiddle and Bow or Shelley Ramalis's Woods Hole Folk Music Club up in the Toronto area, and Jim Hirsch's Old Town School. I mean,
Right.
Had you had much perhaps you'd heard of it, but had you had much familiarity with the Old Town School?
Not a lot.
Were you, did it kind of blow you away?
It did,
Jim
but
Hirsch's own style, which is a hard-driving style.
That's right.
Blow you away?
It's a corporate style.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't knock his success, and since it's in the cause of folk music, I applaud it. But yeah, definite. And here he's got a, I guess, multi-million-dollar organization going there, and we keep. We're lucky we got a few $1,000s in the bank. But yeah, and I guess that again is representative of the all-inclusive nature that the organization needed. We needed the little guys, that are offering the artists the regular bookings, and then we needed the people that had the business expertise that people like Jim Hirsch did to see things through. The big vision. I think our little attempt in the Southeast probably died because we were thinking pretty small, and we were thinking, well, nobody's really got time for this, whatever. And of course, his whole thing, I'm sure, has succeeded because he's had big ideas and the smarts to carry them out, and the initiative to do it. I think it's a pretty remarkable success story for the genre.
Did you think a success story like that, or exposure to Jim's style, and I want to stress for posterity, I don't mean to focus on Jim per se as an individual, but he does have a style, everyone recognizes it, Jim recognizes it.
Yeah.
Do you think that kind of model could help something like Fiddle and Bow, or was it irrelevant to Fiddle and Bow, or?
Well, we're miles apart, of course.
Yeah.
And I don't know that too much of what he does would apply apply to us. We might apply some of his techniques on a local level, fundraising things like that. You know, I know I usually go to his workshops, you know, when I come to the conferences because they're very well organized and he's got good information there. Some of it's not anything that I can really work with, but some of it is, you know, like how you go about approaching people, things like that. Yeah, but I think we still remain on kind of opposite poles of the presenter scene. But it's good though for inspiration, you know, seeing what can be done, you know, if the right person is in the right place at the right time, which he obviously has been for the Old Town School.
Yeah. Now, how many? Do you have any idea how the next conference was in Philly, right? Or you held it there? Not the steering committee meetings, but the conference, and that was still just a few hundred people, wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah, it was a good bit more than the first, but being in the East, where there's a greater concentration, I guess, of people, it was bigger. You know, the East was bigger. Yeah, there were some last minute problems there, I think, with the location. I think actually we dealt with that at the October steering committee meeting. We found out that the place it was going to be
Florida
dump or something.
Wasn't it? There was a place announced. I think it was in Florida.
Well, that might have been considered, but no, I think it was more that the hotel or whatever they had picked in Philadelphia, nobody had been there.
Oh, I see.
I think maybe it's the one that they had used for the Philly Folk Festival or something. And so they finally went to see the place and found out that it was just a dump, you know, basically. So they had to rush out at the last minute and find another location to hold it. So I never saw the first place, but you know, it sounded pretty awful. So I'm glad it wasn't there.
Shelley Ramallah said to me her big concern, and one of the reasons she ended up sort of drifting away, was that she was worried at first that the organization wouldn't have any relevance to what she called, I don't know if it was her term or Sandy's, but it was one of them, the back porch singers. And do you remember any concern about, is this going to be just an organization of folk powerhouses?
Well, I think I do, in a way, yeah. I guess there was some hesitancy on the part of people who see folk music as kind of a participatory back porch kind of thing, to say, to becoming a business, and some reluctance, you know, to make it that for fear of what would happen to it.
Right.
You know, like, and I think there have been some negative things, I guess, along those lines. Just the pressure, you know, on artists to kind of come here and be heard and be seen, and it's, you know, very competitive, and you know, it's very entertaining for those of us who are fans and presenters, but I don't know. I think it's been good for the scene and just kind of connecting people better, you know, knowing what's going on all over the country. I can't say that it's had any real direct impact on what we do, though. I mean, still, it's pretty rare that I'll come here and discover some great new artists that I haven't already heard of, because I follow the scene so closely through, you know, the magazines and read record reviews and things that usually I've heard of people before I get here. So I understand there's some people come here and they book their whole year just from what they see here. I can't do that. We book so far ahead for one thing. I couldn't do it. But then too, this may be their only contact, you know, with this type of thing, the presentation of lots of artists and picking up their promotional materials and all.
Now, the steering committee came up with these 5 stated goals. Do you recall those things at all? I mean, I can run them through you: education, networking, professional development, field development, which I guess means cultivating the grassroots, advocacy. Since these aren't explained beyond the words, advocacy, I'm not sure what it means. I guess getting greater public awareness of this type of music. But was there a lot of hashing out over those words? Was that among the things that are referred to as just debate over the goals? My God, do we say advocacy? Do we not take it, but advocacy? And was that stuff hashed out?
Yeah, probably.
Exhaustively, if memory serves.
Yeah, probably. Everything was hashed out pretty exhaustively, as I recall.
Did you do any subcommittee work, or people break away to?
I don't remember a lot of that. I just remember sitting in the living room or whatever at the Cohen's house.
Right.
Just everybody kind of around the room, and somebody, of course, the facilitator definitely in the second meeting, kind of, working through these things, coming up with bylaws and all that kind of stuff. The details that have to be worked out for that, the legal work that's required to do it.
What do you think the Alliance does best? What's your perception of it, I guess, is really where I'm going after a dozen years or so. How's it held together? How's it worked out? Certainly it's gotten big, but what are its pluses and minuses?
Well, of course, I guess
failures?
the major plus would be just this, the conference,
Right.
which brings everybody together. At the same time that it, creates this frenzy of activity for artists and all that, and almost too much. I mean, as fanatic a fan as I am of folk music, particularly, the middle years, by Sunday I'd had enough. I was ready to go home and just not listen to any music for a while. but now I've kind of learned to get as involved as I'm comfortable with. And so at first I thought, well, I got to be here and I got to be there, but now I just don't worry about it so much. I usually come with a few specific things that I want to do, and I try to deal with those. But so yeah, the conference is great. I guess to some extent in some major cities in North America, it puts folk music on the map, at least for a weekend. As far as some of those other things like education and all that, I'm not really sure how much impact it's had. For one thing, the office itself, the Folk Alliance office itself is pretty small.
Yeah.
And it can't really do anything, I wouldn't think, too much outside of the conference. I don't know. But I'd say that the networking that takes place at the annual conference is probably the major positive of it.
You're not at all alone in that assessment. That seems to be where everyone falls. It's about what the best thing is. What were you? So after the steering committee kind of formed the organization, and I guess it was formed in Philly. Is that right? At the conference.
Yeah, officially became an organization.
Right. You stayed on the board for 3 or 4 years?
No, I didn't. I was just on the steering committee, and a couple of reasons. For one, I couldn't afford to travel around the country to attend board meetings, and they would have to move around kind of so the same people weren't always traveling.
Yeah.
And then two, I think my steering committee experience kind of taught me that this is probably not how I want to be involved with folk music meetings and doing this. That's for those people who take it more seriously than I do. My thing is to enjoy folk music, to present folk music to hopefully an appreciative audience, and try to help the musicians along by offering them a place to play. But it's not for me to sit in meetings and argue and discuss the finer points of bylaws and stuff. So I never really seriously considered it after that.
It's like Sandy Payton, who told me he fled as quickly as the steering committee disbanded.
Yeah, but now a few people did stay on. I think Ann Blaine did.
Yeah.
Probably the Weissmans and Mark Moss. Because you needed some continuity there, certainly, from the steering committee, because they're the ones that knew how it all had taken shape. But it wasn't for me.
Have you done panels since you not attended them, but been on panels?
Not since the real early days. I was at Malibu and I shared my experience with the failed attempt at organizing there. Why it didn't work, things to avoid. And then I think I might have been on something in Philly, but after that I don't recall that I have been. I think pretty quickly the heavier hitters were brought in to do those things. Jim Hirsch and people that had experience that Well,
that's an interesting comment, because you've got a a lot of experience with a certain type of
Lots of time.
organization.
Yeah.
That is probably germane to a whole lot of people in the country who don't live in
Yeah.
Chicago.
Yeah. True.
And who don't want $3 million budgets. And I think that number sticks in my head. It's something
Yeah.
around those realms. But
Yeah, I would, you
Yeah.
know, if something came up about, you know, small folk societies. I haven't been asked, and, you know, I haven't volunteered, you know, just kind of, you know, been happy to just come to the conferences and see folks and do that. I've got a, you know, with a day job and the involvement with Phil and Bo, I don't really have the time to take on preparing for stuff, so I'd probably be a little hesitant to get involved in anything that would take a lot of preparation, and you should prepare properly for stuff like that.
did the steering committee have any involvement in the showcasing in Philadelphia? And I know there was some simple showcasing done on the scale later on.
Yeah, something came out of there, and I don't remember what, but actually that is one other thing I did in Chicago with the third one in '91. I was on the showcase committee.
Okay.
I really enjoyed that. Now, that would be the thing I would really like to be involved in.
Talk a little bit about how that worked and
Well,
how
yeah.
you got together. I'd like as much of a flavor of
Yeah.
that, because I haven't talked to anyone about that subject before. So
Well, it was great. It was myself and Jewel Alden, who
Okay.
was from the Chicago area.
I
Who
talked
I
to
haven't
him.
seen Jewel in years. He hasn't been coming.
He's
I
not
think.
here this weekend either. I talked to him just last week.
Yeah, and Shelley.
Yeah.
We were the showcase committee, and what we did, anybody interested in, you know, word was sent out, I guess, through the existing media things, maybe Sing Out, you know, that if you were an artist and you wanted to showcase, to submit, I think, 3 tapes. And so we each got a big box. You know, I think at that time there was still a lot of people. I don't know how many, and I think at that time it was like 18 people would be picked, 6 would be Canadian, and we basically had no guidelines to go on. So we had completely unknown artists competing against Sci-Con, you know, to showcase. And we didn't, I mean, all we had to, I guess we finally decided, well, we're not going to care about reputation or anything like that. We're just going to pick out the ones that we think are the best.
Okay.
And so we each came up with our list, and we got on a conference call, and we compared notes. And of course, any that we all picked were automatic. That didn't quite do the list, so then we just talked about it. For instance, Iris DeMint submitted a cassette that were very crude. I mean, she had like a 2-page bio thing. You know, I knew her life after that. And then a little 3 or 4 song crude demo. And I was the only one that put her on. This is kind of my bragging here. Neither Jewel or Shelley thought it was that good, but I mean, it was a really primitive tape. I thought, wow, this is an incredible voice. And I carried her demo tape around in my car, cassette player, for a long time. And so I managed to talk them into, you know, inviting Iris DeMint. And I don't know if she had a contract already worked out with Rounder, but certainly they were there. You know, I'd like to think that in some small way, maybe.
I'll ask him.
That was a little, you know, yeah, if they had never met before that weekend, I'll really have a right to brag. But
Find that out today.
Yeah. But chances are she did, because I think Jim Rooney already knew her, and
Okay.
they're closely connected. I imagine Jim Rooney was probably pushing her by then, but I really enjoyed that, because I'm such a collector of recordings and hear so much that I kind of think I've got a pretty good ear for what's good and you know what isn't so much. And so I really enjoyed being on the showcase committee, and that's really the only thing that I would ever really make any attempt to get involved in. But I mean, I saw the list this time. I don't even know those people, but I think for a few years it was a guy from Canada who works with, I don't know if it's a festival or something out there. I can't remember his name.
Lowell?
No. Damn, I can't remember. But that was really enjoyable. Tough job, but and then that's always been kind of that was probably a matter of discussion too in the steering committee. It was that, well, is the showcase going to be for new artists to give them some exposure, or is it going to be to recognize the best of the folk scene? And I guess it was just kind of decided by no decision in the early days that it would be, hey, you get the stuff, you pick out the best. If it's an unknown artist, great. If it's Tom Paxton, that's okay too. You know, so it tends to be a mixture, I think. And over the years, I've noticed that the artists pick are a good mixture of some fairly good names and then people I've never heard of. And that's to me what it should be, I guess.
Of course, with 18 slots and a few hundred submissions, you could probably fill the 18 with good quality stuff pretty easily. So did you think about, well, we can't have 18 Iris Dements who's nobody ever heard of?
No.
Was there a conscious feeling, we've got to have some names?
Yeah,
No.
well, and there was a feeling too that we need a mixture of types of music,
Okay.
and we need male and female artists. And I think too, maybe not so much and probably too in Chicago, and I think it's continued on, getting some artists from the area where the conference is going to be held. And I think that's been made even more official over the last years by bringing in art like Tucson, for instance, you know, Native American artists, that kind of thing, and that's good too, because when we go to a particular part of the country, then I think it's good that you get some exposure to what's unique about the music in that area.
What's your take on, well, just last year, you weren't last year, but I went to a session called, they labeled it peer group sessions, and this was a peer group session devoted to a discussion of traditional music. So per se it was those who self-identified themselves as people interested in more traditional side of things. And the topic was, you know Charlie Pilzer? Okay, he was running the show, and at Phyllis's request, he asked people if they, well, he first gave voice to this concern that he was hearing, and Phyllis, I guess, was hearing, that people are saying, oh, the Folk Alliance is getting away from an interest in traditional music, or an inadequate interest, something you're obviously familiar with.
Yeah.
And, you know, so, you know, what are the ways to address that? Should we have a separate